Hi folks, welcome to my video on the Threath. Hi folks, I want to talk to you today about the Welsh 3000s race. It's a really functional title. It's the older one. Sometimes you might hear of it referred to as the 14 peaks or the 15 peaks, but the 3000s, the Welsh 3000s, the W3K, that's how I like to talk about it because it's really descriptive. Each one of those peaks 3,000 feet or more high. Of course, we don't go up and down 3,000 feet each time. They're conveniently interconnected ridges. We'll talk about the geography and the terrain a little bit later in this video. But what I want to talk to you today is, for those of you who've signed up, well done, you got in. We have a limited number of places on this event simply because of the sort of geography and the logistics, and a combination of those two things. It's quite challenging to get a set number of people around. It's quite challenging to get yourself round. I know, I've done it many times over 7, 8, 9 years now. Won the race for 7 consecutive years in my club, the Welsh 3000s race that we hold every year. So I know a little bit about the race. I know a fair bit about the geography and all of the challenges that are intrinsic within the event. So if you signed on, this whole video is something you should watch right the way through, and I'd suggest watching a couple of times because there will be things that maybe you miss first time round that I cover, and you don't want to miss those opportunities. So let's look at the history of the event first of all. 1919, Eustace Thomas, a member of the Rucksack Club, completes it successfully end to end. Now, the Victorians were pretty prolific in the hills of North Wales as they were in the Alps, and of course elsewhere like the Lake District and so on. So it's no surprise to see our Victorian ancestors nipping around the hills. I don't have a record of a time there for that, but it was interesting that doesn't always make it into the history books. So I don't quite know why that is. I imagine that the Welsh farmers that would no doubt have been offering their services as guides to Victorian mountaineers, just like Eustace, probably knew the route quite well themselves beforehand, and as a result had maybe done it in an unrecorded way or a non-timed way, maybe between themselves as a little competition. In any event, our recorded history of the Welsh 3000s tends to start around the turn of the century, but it really kicks up a notch in 1938. In the spring, in the spring of 1938, Thomas Furbank decided with his wife Esme to make a bit of a competition between themselves and their friends later and do the whole route, starting on Snowden. His companions and he and his wife, off they go, and he gives a fascinating description of that in his book, I Bought a Mountain. He was a Canadian, came over to Snowdonia, bought a hill farm and became a Welsh sheep hill farmer. So, interesting book, really good actually, a good read if you're interested in the Welsh trees, or indeed just that sort of transition in life. He writes well, and it's well worth a look, So, moving on to a little bit more proximity to modern times, 1988. There were a number of different events. Joss Naylor, he brought the record time down. No one really competed with him for some time until a guy called Colin Donnelly, who I think was stationed at RAF Valley, the RAF base on Anglesey, took the record for himself and reduced it to 4 hours 19 minutes. I didn't write that down, so I had to go to memory there. 4 hours 19 minutes, and that's a pretty significant achievement if you think about the fact that he starts on Snowdon and he does 15 mountains over 26 miles. That would be a decent time for a road marathon on the flat. He did it in the mountains and went probably, it's slightly shorter than the marathon distance from summit to summit, from start to finish, but notwithstanding that, you still have to get to that first summit and you still have to come down off that last summit, so an achievement. And that wasn't touched. 1989, Angela Carson sets a women's record, and then it took till 2019, so quite a while later, before a guy called Finley Wild took 9 minutes off Colin Donnelly's time and brought that down to 4 hours 10. That's a massively fast time. My own personal time, I think, is 8:35. That's the fastest I've done the race in. But I started walking, and I did that in 15 and 3/4 hours. So it's a bit of a difference over the years. Managed to sort of bite off bits of that time and get it down to 8:35. But it's hard. It's hard to run any section of any mountain anywhere, really. I think the Welsh 3000, Snowdonia, is not known for its easy mountains. If you've been there, you know. So yeah. So let's look at the what is it. Well, distance we've already talked about. It's about 23.5, 24. Pick a website, you'll see a different distance. It really kind of doesn't matter, because when you're there, when you're doing it, your focus isn't on the whole event. Like in a marathon, you know that there's 26 miles, there's a guaranteed number, 26.2, and you've got a pacing strategy and all those sorts of things. For a first attempt at the Welsh 3000s, it took me a number of attempts actually before I got into the mechanics of planning it out. I had a plan for my running, so from year one, I started methodically with a plan. I found that really helped. But it took me 3 years or so before I started to think about altitude. Altitude up until that point had been, if I'm going up hills, I'm doing the right thing, that must be right. I followed a periodised plan for running, but I didn't have a periodised plan for altitude. And if you don't know what periodizers is, don't worry. It's just basically a training or a coach's concept for how we build runners up, build in recovery, and then peak their efforts at a particular point in time. So those are all good things. So let's look next at the ascent, since we're on that subject of volumizing ascent. If you look at the amount of ascent that you're gonna encounter on the day, you're talking around about 10,000 plus feet of ascent. So that's just going uphill. Doesn't include your downhills. And that really makes a massive difference when you're training, because actually, if you look at a normal race, you might have a hilly marathon, or you might have a fairly flat marathon. But very often you're not running up mountains unless you're doing a trail one particularly. Even the Snowden Marathon is on road and it only goes up and down the passes. So, speaking of passes, speaking of mountains, those types of things, let's have a think about cover what types of mountain groups are in there. We've got 3 main mountain groups. The first group is the Snowden Group. It's probably the most famous of all of the mountains in North Wales. It obviously covers Snowden. Snowden's in there, the highest peak. And the most famous peak, I think, and probably the most popular in the park. One of the most popular mountains in Wales, England and Wales, and the UK more widely. So when we think about that, we think of a really busy mountain, a couple of key paths. There are 7 key paths up Snowden. They're always thronged throughout the summer months and quite busy with people in the winter. But I can take you on routes that, for example, the descent route, that you'll see virtually no one on. I can guarantee, coming off Snowden, we'll pass a handful of people near the top, and on one of those routes, we're probably not going to pass anybody. Maybe one other person, perhaps. So it's interesting that even in the most popular places, you can find routes, you become aware of routes over the years that you won't see anyone on. So that's one thing. It's one section. But of course, it's not just Snowden. We may start on Snowden. For some of us, we might start on the summit of Crib Goch. Those details will be determined by which group you're in, what pace you're running, and your ability level. And also, more importantly, I think, whether you will be content with exposure or not. If not, we can avoid that. So, Snowden, Garnered again, and Crib Goch. Many people know Crib Goch. It's an exposed, thin, knife-edge ridge sitting at around about 3,000 feet high, and is infamous rather than famous, I think. However, as I say, we can avoid that if some of you prefer. For those of you who want that extra element of challenge, a frisson of excitement, then we can cover that too. Okay, so that's group 1. We've descended off the Snowden range now, headed into Nant Peris. We're going to be met by our support team, and then when we've refreshed ourselves and done what we need to do, we head up Ilidi of our first mountain in the Glyder range, or the Glyderau range of mountains. This is the area where we're going to encounter the most of our ascent. It's going to be pretty hard going, so having the muscles ready and developed in training for those ascents, followed by descents, followed by ascent and descent, and so on. Also, whilst tackling some of the roughest terrain that we will encounter on the whole of the weekend, will be vital. Okay, so slog up 2,456 feet of ascent, I think, up Ilidi of Our. It's the longest sustained slope in all of Snowdonia for the length. It's just over a mile as well, so it packs a bit of a punch. We'll get up there, but the views, once we descend off the mountain and circle around the head wall there of that valley, will be amazing. We'll see both valleys, the Llanberis on one side, Ogwen on the other, which really exposes sort of beauty of the route, and it's probably one of the best places to see everything you've done, and yet you have still to come. So Great place to just take stock of our days and our whole weekend, because of course we're splitting this over 2 days, don't forget. We move on. Mountains Igarn, then Glidavac, the Gliders there, where the range gets its name from. An amazing landscape, a really amazing and surreal landscape, really. It's a bit like running on the surface of the moon. So for some, this will be an interesting challenge to try and keep upright without stumbling around. It certainly is for me. I enjoy running there. But others, we're going to take it a little bit more leisurely, take our time, keep safe, and get to the next mountain, which is, after a bit of a descent, Trivan. So that might be one that you've heard of before. It's a famous mountain. Incredible scrambles up the north side of that. We won't be scrambling up it. We'll be tackling it by its south ridge, but we will descend via the west. The west starts with a gully, bit of a scramble down into the gully, and then descending. This is where, especially after dealing with Snowden, we're going to want to make sure that our muscles are developed enough to cope with the descending. And I speak totally from experience here. I've had those aching legs. I've had the cramp in the afternoon, which besets us with that sort of unknown, unannounced pain. So we want to be as prepared as we can be for that. And I will share with you, if you're signing up to the training plan and the private group, I'll share with you some tactics I've had to deal with that. Okay, so Conadai. Now, Conadai come next, and that's the final group of mountains for us. We will split the days somewhere in the Gliders. It might be between Igarn and Glidavaur. It might be after Trivan. It depends, and it may well be very different depending upon what group you're in. Okay, so yet to be determined, and obviously if you're in the training group, that will help, because I will be able to directly see what it is that's happening for your training, and ultimately what it means for you on the day of the days of the event. Conadai Mountains come next, straight up and at 'em, up Penarol Wen. I tended to take the south ridge, which was hard to say the least. It's brutish, it's straight up. We've got a better plan for you, which means that we will go up the east face of, or east side of Penarol Wen, which makes it a bit easier. It's a lot more scenic, because instead of a rock wall in front of your face, you actually see different landscapes opening up as you ascend. So that's really nice. And then the Carneds Daffod Llewellyn, the side peak, or the satellite peak of Irelen. It's a beautiful sort of airy ridge, but nothing exposed, so it's a nice place to be. And then we come back from Irelen, we'll miss out Carned Llewellyn, we've done that already. Foil Grach, the Carned Llewellyn, the 14th peak, and then the final 15th peak, which is Foil Frass. From there we'll descend, be picked up, and hot foot out of there. So I didn't tell you that Ogwen is usually the support point for people who continue, but for us it will be an extraction point. Okay, so that'll be where we go back after day one. And the same will happen after Foil Frass. We've got a 3 and a bit mile walk out from the final summit, downhill and out into the cars, and away we go. So that's sort of the stuff of the days, I guess. What can you do to make it easier? This is vitally important, guys. So if you've stuck around this long, you will be the beneficiaries of a bit more information here. I've designed a training plan for myself for 7 years. That training plan has unquestionably helped me to win the race. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of you want to win the race. Some of you want to survive. I can guarantee you that a training plan will help you have a less painful 2 days, right? Because if you haven't got the right muscles ready, if you haven't got the experience on the terrain, if you haven't built in altitude in an appropriate way, you will suffer on those days, because it's a big 2-day event. This is an ultra for a reason. A lot of ultras, it's a bit like marathons or 10Ks. They get that name because that's the distance, right? This is not the case with an ultra. This ultra is a mountain ultra, which means that it's not just any distance over 26.2 miles. You know, it's technically shorter start to finish, but it's longer when you add in the ascent and the descent at the start and the finish. So you're dealing with an ultra in length, but you're also dealing with the mountains. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a plan. I can't tell you how important it is to factor in that altitude, even if it's just on a treadmill. You know, to get it right and to get it in a measured way is supremely important. A training plan will help you do that. Okay, I have done it for myself for years, and I have won the race for 7 years, so I know what I'm talking about. you need acclimatization to that altitude. So training plan, I'll give you 5 months training plan. Each month is $28 a month. It's the same price as my coaching, so there's no extra price for that. You don't have to have a training plan if you don't want to. It's not compulsory, but it is advised. I tried to do it for years and years and years before and just couldn't get there. I was halfway through or a third of the way through, and I'd always end up retiring because of one thing or another. So there's a lot of this that is advantageous to have a plan, but the plan doesn't just include a plan that's written by me every week, although that is part of it. I will set your plans weekly for you, and set you up with the right types of training in a detailed way to get you to the Welsh 3000s and to get you through it successfully. But we'll also add you to a Facebook group, private Facebook group, so those people who get the plan to get into that. That's where we're going to share information. That's where I'll be going live for a bit like this, but you'll be able to interact with me more. We'll have Q&As, we'll have live sessions on nutrition, how to prepare. I can't believe it took me so many years to get to that point, but the nutrition aspect, guys, is vitally important. You've got to get that on point, but also you need to know that the stuff you're eating on the day is useful. So we will provide you with support and food during the day to some degree, but a lot of that food is going to have to be A, carried by you, and B, you're going to need to make sure that you can actually stomach it on the training runs, because if you don't, you won't know it works on the actual race itself. So that's vital too. So I'll give you advice on that. I'll also be advising you how to stay injury free. Of course, you know what I think about that. How to stay injury free on training like this. Now that's a challenge, but it's possible. It's eminently possible. So we can do that. What else? Well, obviously training for distance, training for altitude, and training for the terrain, right? I'm also going to include the option, it's an option for you if you want, to come on acclimatization days. So I haven't worked these in yet, but they will be. I will be sending emails out to offer these to you. So it might at this point just be one-off days. I don't know whether they'll be weekends, so I appreciate for some of you that might be a challenge. But obviously feel free, if you need me to sort out accommodation for us, I'll have for one night, the night before or the night after. We could have an arrival in the morning. We'll all go and do our acclimatization day, perhaps nip to the pub, have a meal, because by this point they'll be open, and then off we go the following morning, perhaps to back home and what have you. So we could do that. We could do a one night. So I'm not suggesting it's going to be a full weekend, but that could be an option. I might have 2 different days available, so with 2 different walks. So if you've done one of these acclimatization days before, you don't want to do Snowden section again, let's say, the second day might be the Glidders, something like that. Yet to be worked through, but pop me a message if that's something that interests you, and I will get back to you and I'll talk to you about that. So lots of information here, lots of information. Like I said at the start, please watch this a second time or third time, as many times as you want. There's a lot of data in here that you really need to soak up, because what you've taken on is a big thing, but you will have me there. You will have my team of run leaders there. We will look after you. We will have safety in mind. Okay, so there may be an occasion where for some people finishing is actually a more dangerous thing than retiring, and therefore we might have to make that decision. So please, if we do that, please respect your run leaders or myself if we ask you to do that, but let's hope not. I'm sure that we won't have to deal with that. Also, you're going to need kit advice. So in that group, I'll provide you with kit advice. If you're not in the training plan group, I will give you kit advice anyway. We're just going to go into a little bit more detail, and I'll give you some options about what might and might not work differently, dependent upon your type of running and what you've done and what you're going to be doing. Because of course, you're not just going to buy a jacket for the day. Let's say if you're buying a jacket, you're going to buy a jacket for the days. You're going to buy a jacket that's going to last you through all your training too. So we'll talk about that, and we'll have a lot more opportunity for Q&A in that group. So if you're interested in the group, it's 5 months training, and I advise staying with it for 5 months, otherwise what's the point? So it's a commitment to 5 months. As I say, it's $28 a month. You'll get all of the advantages of being in any of my coaching groups, but you will get a little bit of different stuff really, because actually it's much more tailored, and that's the point. It's really tailored. So I hope this has been useful. I hope to see you on the training plan. Let me know if you'd like to sign up. It's www.focusedperformance.co.uk /W3K plan. It's that simple, /W3K plan. But I'll drop a link in so you'll be able to click straight through to it. And I look forward to seeing you on the day of the race. See you soon, guys. Bye.